The smoke didn't rise slowly, it exploded into the sky like a warning no one could ignore. By the time anyone noticed the fire tearing through the upper floors of the glass tower, it was already too late for most of the people trapped inside. And standing on the sidewalk below, clutching a worn-out backpack in one hand and his daughter's tiny shoe in the other, Ryan Qureshi made a decision that would change his life forever. He wasn't a hero, not by any standard anyone would recognize. He was just a single father who worked double shifts at a warehouse, whose hands were always rough, whose eyes always carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had no time to fall apart. But that day, as sirens screamed and people gathered in terrified clusters, something inside him refused to stand still. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heart Touch Stories. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The building burned like it had something to prove. Flames licked through windows, shattering glass, devouring everything they touched. People were screaming from inside, their voices faint but desperate. Firefighters hadn't arrived yet, and the crowd below had already begun to accept that there was nothing they could do. Nothing except watch. But Ryan couldn't watch. He had come to the city center that afternoon to pick up a second-hand school bag for his 6-year-old daughter, Mare. He had saved for weeks just to afford it. Life had not been kind since his wife passed away 2 years earlier. Illness had taken her quickly, leaving behind hospital bills and a silence that no amount of work could fill. Since then, every day had been a balancing act, earning just enough to survive while trying to be both father and mother to a little girl who still asked when her mom was coming back. And now, standing there with smoke burning his throat, he thought of Mare waiting at home with her neighbor, trusting that her father would come back. Most people would have stayed. Ryan didn't. He handed the small shoe to a stunned bystander, dropped his bag, and ran toward the building. Inside, the heat hit him like a wall. It wasn't just hot, it was suffocating, alive, as if the fire itself had a heartbeat. The lobby was filled with smoke, alarms screaming, sprinklers failing to keep up. He wrapped his sleeve around his mouth and moved forward, ignoring the voice in his head that told him this was madness. Somewhere above, someone was still alive. The staircase was chaos, people pushing down, coughing, crying, some collapsing on the steps. Ryan forced his way upward, against the current, driven by something deeper than fear. Every step felt heavier, every breath harder, but he kept going. By the time he reached the 10th floor, the crowd had thinned. The higher he went, the quieter it became, not peaceful, but terrifyingly still. That kind of silence only existed when hope was fading. Then he heard it, a faint sound, not a scream, not a call for help, just movement. He followed it down a smoke-filled corridor, his eyes watering, his lungs screaming for air. And there, near the shattered remains of an office door, he found her. She was unconscious, slumped against a wall, her clothes singed, her face pale beneath the soot. Even in that condition, there was something unmistakable about her presence, something composed, powerful, out of place in the chaos. Ryan didn't know who she was. He only knew she was still breathing. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she felt compared to the weight of the moment. Carrying her back toward the stairs was harder than anything he had ever done. The heat intensified, flames creeping closer, the structure groaning like it was about to give in. Halfway down, part of the ceiling collapsed behind him. There was no turning back. Each step became a battle. His arms trembled, his vision blurred, but he refused to let go. He thought of Mare again, of her laughter, her stubbornness, the way she held onto his hand like it was the safest place in the world. That thought alone pushed him forward. When he finally stumbled out of the building, collapsing onto the pavement with the woman still in his arms, the world seemed to rush back all at once. Sirens, shouting, flashing lights, it all blurred together. Paramedics rushed to them, pulling her away gently, checking her pulse, administering oxygen. Ryan lay there, coughing, barely aware of anything except the burning in his chest. And then, as the woman regained consciousness, her eyes fluttered open. The crowd leaned in, expecting gratitude, relief, something human. But her first words were cold, sharp, and completely unexpected. She looked straight at Ryan and said, with a voice still weak but unmistakably firm, "Why did you risk my life like that?" The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke. Ryan blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Around them, people exchanged confused glances. Even the paramedics paused for a moment. She pushed the oxygen mask slightly aside, her gaze unwavering. "You could have made things worse. Do you have any idea who I am?" Ryan didn't, and in that moment, it didn't matter. He struggled to sit up, his body protesting, his voice hoarse. "You were going to die." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "And now my entire company is at risk because of reckless decisions like yours." That was when someone in the crowd whispered her name. Aisha Rahman, the CEO of one of the largest tech corporations in the country. A woman known for her brilliance, her discipline, and her distance from anything resembling vulnerability. The realization spread through the crowd like another kind of fire. Ryan just stared at her, confused, hurt, but too exhausted to respond. He had run into a burning building, risked everything, and this was what he received. Not gratitude, not even acknowledgement, just criticism. In the days that followed, the story spread everywhere. News channels praised the anonymous hero, who had saved a powerful CEO, but Aisha's response during her first press statement surprised everyone. She didn't mention him, not once. Instead, she spoke about safety protocols, corporate responsibility, and the need for stricter building regulations. It was as if the man who had carried her out of the fire didn't exist. For Ryan, life didn't suddenly improve. There were no rewards, no recognition that reached him directly. He returned to work, his body still recovering, his lungs aching with every breath. At home, Mare hugged him tighter than usual when he returned that evening, her small arms wrapping around him like she sensed how close she had come to losing him. And for him, that was enough. Or at least, he tried to believe it was. But something lingered, not anger, not exactly. Just a quiet question. Why? Weeks passed. The city moved on, as it always did. The burned building became just another headline fading into memory. Until one afternoon, when Ryan received a call that would pull him back into a world he had never belonged to. He was asked to come to a corporate office. Not just any office, Aisha Rahman's. He almost didn't go, but something told him he needed to. The building was everything his life wasn't: polished, controlled, intimidating. People in suits moved with purpose, their eyes scanning him briefly before looking away. When he was finally led into her office, he found her standing by a large window, the city stretched out behind her. She turned slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, quietly this time, "You came." Ryan nodded, unsure what to expect. And then, for the first time since that day, her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "I owe you an explanation," she said. What followed wasn't an apology, not immediately. It was something deeper, more complicated. She spoke about pressure, about expectations, about how her entire life had been built on control, on never appearing weak, on always thinking 10 steps ahead. She admitted that waking up in that moment, surrounded by chaos, had triggered something instinctive, a defense mechanism that saw risk before gratitude. "It wasn't about you," she said finally. "It was about fear, and I handled it wrong." Ryan listened, not interrupting, not judging. And then she said the words that should have come earlier. "Thank you." They were simple, but they carried weight. More than the crowd had expected weeks ago. More than he had expected to hear at all. But this wasn't just about gratitude. Aisha had been searching for him, quietly, deliberately. Not for publicity, but for something else. Opportunity. She had learned about his life, his struggles, his daughter. And she wanted to help. Not with charity, but with a chance. A job, training, stability. At first, Ryan hesitated. Pride, uncertainty, fear of stepping into a world that didn't feel like his. But then he thought of Mare. Of her future. And slowly, carefully, he said yes. Life didn't transform overnight, but it began to change. And sometimes, that's more powerful than anything instant. As Ryan found his place in a new environment, as Mare started smiling more, as the weight of survival began to lift just slightly, he realized something important. Kindness doesn't always come back the way you expect. Sometimes it comes back quietly. Slowly, in forms you didn't even know you needed. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And before we end, tell us in the comments, would you have made the same choice as Ryan? Because in the end, his story wasn't about being a hero. It was about choosing humanity when it would have been easier to walk away. And sometimes, that choice is enough to change everything.